Oh, this is Greg from the Yukon. I've talked before about tools for moose hunting, but I've started to evolve my views. I've talked about having one perfect knife, pocket knife, because it's nice to carry something small, but really when you're moose hunting, at my fitness level and looking at the size of the moose, I've done 4 or 5 moose now, and I'm not carrying a moose very far on my back, and it means you need transportation. So if you've got the transportation piece, having an extra few pounds for perfect moose equipment isn't a bad idea. So let's talk a little bit about transportation options. Okay, so here it's winter. There are winter seasons. So Comatic, skidoo. Here's a skidoo with another type of sled. There's actually a moose there that we're going to get a bit later. There's a Rokon. There's also other types of ATVs, and all of these things allow you to carry a fair bit of weight. A canoe, you're going to have to solo because there's not enough room for 2 men in a canoe unless you got something like this giant freighter, which is a great device. Initial cuts. The first step to, you got a moose down, and it's a little intimidating the first time you see it, but you start one step at a time, and the first step is going to be your initial cuts. And for your initial cuts, you want a really, really sharp blade. And it's a sort of pre-skinning. You're starting your ventral cut or dorsal cut. You're starting your cut down the legs up through to the head, so that you can start taking the skin off. And you're sort of like pre-skinning. You're just getting the flaps open so you can get at them with a skinning knife. For this, the tool to use is something very, very sharp, something like the Havalon Paranta. Havalon Paranta is a great little knife because it's got razor blades, replaceable razor blades, really, really sharp. Makes a great job for those first cuts, and it's very light, very small. There we go. So hidden in your hand. Another small knife that I really, really enjoy is another folder, and this is a Blade Tech design. Hunter Junior, really great distal taper. Let's see if I can get a good shot of the distal taper here. Where am I? You just take a look at that tip. That tip goes to nothingness here. So it's very, very sharp tip. Nice drop point. Really, really good for those first initial cuts. And those initial cuts are basically just your starting cuts. You're not going to need to sharpen any kind of knife. That's Oz 8 fine for those initial cuts, and that's another hides right in your hand. And you can even use something like this little folder here, which is just an old Schrade when they were made in the U.S. And just a little blade like that will even work for your initial cuts. And you can also use the same knife for then caping if you wanted to keep the cape, which I never do, but some folks do. Your moose is down. It's fairly intimidating. You got to start with your initial cuts, and here I'm starting at the chest of the animal, going up through to his legs, starting at the brisket. You can also start at the back of the animal. And there's a perfect little knife. That's that Blade Tech knife for those initial cuts. Okay, here we go. So, skinning. Once you've got those pre-cuts down, we now have about an hour of skinning, and you might as well have a really good skinning knife. And the best skinning knife that I've found is just the classic industry standard kind of skinner. I like the lamb skinner. This lamb skinner is by Victorinox. It's very thin, so it's a fantastic slicer. It's got very good steel, keeps an edge pretty well. It's not super hard, so it'll sharpen up easily. Best of all, the handle is designed to be used all day, because people that would use this in the industry would use it all day, and that's what it was designed for. So if it's good enough for those guys in industry, good enough for me. Once you've done your initial cuts, it's time to start skinning the animal. You got to get that hide off before it gets too hot, so you got to skin that animal fairly quickly. You're going to need to make a handle for your knife, or rather a sheath for your skinning knife. And this skinning knife can also be used for the next step, which would be once you've basically got the hide off of the animal, you're wanting to take off the front shoulders, you want to take off the back shoulders. Usually do this a side at a time. So you'll take off the hide of the animal off of one side, and you'll take off his front quarter, you'll take off his hind quarter. You're not cutting bone at these times, you're cutting the front shoulder. You're able to go right underneath the shoulder blade, and you're just cutting muscles, a few ligaments and tendons, and away it comes. The back quarter, you're cutting around the hip girdle, you're going around. If you put a little pressure, the back ball will open up, and you can just go right around. Then you'll flip the animal. You'll often take the head off before you flip them, and again you can take the head off of the animal by finding right behind the ears the ball joint. So you can use this skinning knife because it's straight enough, and this is why I like this lamb skinner. So this could be your one knife, or you might decide you want a little straighter knife, in which case I favor this little Herder's knife, Herder's design knife. It's sold by Murphy Knife Company. It's also fairly thin. It's also thin this way so you can use it as a boning knife, and it's long enough, this knife is long enough that you're actually able to take nice long cuts and not have a lot of mini serrations in your meat. So you're taking off your head, your front quarters, your rear quarter, all with a knife like that. Hello, son. Did you want to be in my movie? Here we are popping off a front quarter, and there's that ball joint in the back quarter, and that's how you take those off. So your next stage is the headless torso stage, where you're left with a headless torso. Even though it's called gutless skinning, you still have to handle the guts. So you can either cut the ribs from the back to the 10th rib, which is where the diaphragm is, or you can and then handle the guts. But often you handle the guts first. You make a little incision, you reach into the gut cavity, and you move the guts basically away from the backbone, and that frees up the tenderloins, which you can then take out. And it also allows you to now cut the ribs from the back, and you also cut through the brisket, and you free up the ribs. You can then bone the ribs or leave the ribs together. I usually leave them together because I think they last longer that way. So for those tools, for actually removing the back, the ribs, the best tool is probably a saw. Lots of saws you can use. There's lots of folding saws. I've started to favor just a little saw like this, which is basically designed to go in a toolbox saw. And although it's designed for wood, it works fine for bone. I've heard some people use great big garden clippers to clip the ribs. I've never tried that. I find the saw works really well, and it also works well through the brisket. The other tool that I have used, and I probably have used more than a saw, is an axe. I use this small Granfors Brux axe. It's a hunting axe, very, very well designed, great steel in it. The problem with an axe is I heated my house with wood for a long time, so I got fairly handy with an axe. If you're not handy with an axe, leave the axe at home. There's a chance for injury with an axe. Less chance of injury with a saw, and even if you did get injured with a saw, it'd be less. But either of these tools, because you're dealing with bone now, better to use these tools than a knife. Here we're just cutting through the brisket. Another tool I wanted to talk about a little bit is this tool, which is called rope. So you should have some rope with you. You should also probably have a come along with you in case the moose gets in water. Sometimes they go to water when they're injured and you want to get them out of there. You can also use a pulley as long as you got a 5-to-1 ratio or better, so that you can get the moose out. The other thing I like to bring with me are a carabiner or two and some pulleys, and these are from a chandlery shop. And basically what this allows, if you're by yourself, this allows you to, you sometimes want to put pressure on a joint when you're gutless skinning, so this allows you to take your rope, find a tree, or usually you've got alders nearby or something nearby, and put some pressure using these and your rope. Put some pressure on the joints, so especially that hind joint. It acts somewhat like a third man, so that's another great tool to have with you when you're looking after a moose. Another tool that's well worthwhile are game bags. I've used all types of game bags. I started with the cheesecloth bags from place like Canadian Tire. They're cheap, they tear, they don't even keep out bugs that lay eggs because they're so open weaved. They do keep the meat cleaner than nothing. Some people use an acidic spray, is another good tool. But as far as game bags go, the best type of game bags are either the heavy canvas bags, which won't tear and they still breathe reasonably well. They're a little heavy, but that doesn't matter. Or these bags, which are called tag bags, and these are made out of 100% polyester. They're very strong, they're very, very light, and they mildew less readily. They still breathe very well. So probably these tag bags are the superior choice, especially if you've got more than 2 days, say, to get back to civilization and you've got to keep your meat dry, warm, or dry cold. You really want to keep your meat cool, and game care becomes very, very tricky the longer you're out. I'm usually a motorized hunter, so I'm back a little bit quicker, so I can still get by with the big heavy canvas, which are a little cheaper and reusable probably almost for life. Last set of tools to talk about are when you get home. And when you get home, you want to cut up your meat, because you might as well do the whole thing yourself. Especially when you're using gutless skinning, butchers don't always know what to do with the cuts because they're a little bit different than the traditional farm type cuts. So you might as well do the whole thing. You learn a whole lot, and it's going to take you 12 hours. Two tools that you need is, one tool for sure is called the scimitar knife. It's also called a breaking knife. It's got a great big blade. It's thin. This one is a Henkel's. It's got a wonderful thumb rest. Again, that wonderful handle shape which you'll see on these production industry knives. These industry knives, I think they're better to use all the way through. This knife, because of its length, allows you to make long slices on steaks and stuff, so it's really, really nice to use. Sharpens up in a jiffy with steel, and I love these plastic guards that you can get. This one I had to modify a bit because the blade was too long, but that's a nice thing to keep them in. I got these from Lee Valley. The other knife you're going to need to look after is a good boning knife, and that's the classic semi-flexible boner. Again, this is a Henkel's with a nice thumb rest, great handle, decent quality, not great steel, but a decent quality steel. Sharpens up again really, really quickly. And then the other tool, which I think is almost the most important for home processing your meat, is a giant cutting board. So this guy's a 2-foot cutting board, and the little cutting boards you get, even if they're the medium-sized ones, are just not enough. This is kind of the minimum size to get you by, and it really makes a big difference to have a nice cutting board. You can also use something called puck board if you want to save a little bit of money. This is the high-density polyethylene industry quality. They're about $50. This and my axe are probably my most expensive meat cutting tools, and I just love this big board. Makes a big difference when you're working with big hunks of meat, and with a moose you're looking at big hunks of meat. And here's what it looks like just before you're ready to head for home with your big load of meat. Now there's a different moose there that's been partially processed. There's my backpack getting washed out. That's a carry-all from LL Bean. Worked up pretty well. And there we are, finally back at home with a big load of moose. You need a forgiving wife to be able to do this, and then it's really nice to be able to cut up your own meat and make your little packages.